Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be discussing how to get bees started on your flow frames. And the reason why we're doing that is it's a common question that people have. They've got excited, they've put the bees in, they've put their top box on, they're waiting for the bees to start showing some signs of honey on the flow frames. So you can see the flow frames through the window here, and you can see these bees haven't done a whole lot on the frames yet. And that's simply because there's not a nectar flow around. So the best thing to do if you're wanting the bees to start on your flow frames is actually to exercise patience, because what we need is a lot of bees in the box, and this is halfway there. There's a lot of bees moving up now, which is good, and that needs to coincide with a nectar flow where there's flowers dripping with nectar and the bees can go and get them and then store some honey, and then it'll start happening quite quickly. Having said that, people get impatient, fair enough. So what I'm going to do is show you how to scrape a bit of burr comb off some of your brood frames and put it in, mash it into the flow frame surface, just so you can speed up that process. And if you've got things that you do yourself, put it in the comments below. It's all about sharing the tips and tricks that you've built up along the way. So I'm looking in the rear window here just to assess what's going on. I can see a lot of bees starting to do their work, and if you look closely you'll actually see they have started on the flow frames here. They're putting little wax joins, they're joining all the seams, joining all the parts of the flow frames together, but they actually haven't started building the bridges between the parts. So that'll be a little while yet before we get honey being stored in your flow frames, in these ones here, and simply because there's no flowers available for the bees. So what I'm going to do is first of all just have a little look inside and see what they're doing in the centre, and after that we're going to take the box right off and have a look in the bottom, see if we can scrape some burr comb off and show you how to do that neat little trick I was talking about, and scraping some burr comb off the brood frames and putting it right in the window. If you got questions, put it in the comments. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you are. It's really interesting to us to learn about where everyone is. Now I wasn't expecting the inner cover to come up with the roof, but it did. So I might just put my bee suit on. It's always a good idea to protect yourself from bees. This is a calm hive, so I'm not too worried about it. But what we're going to do is do up my bee suit, because you're better off being on the side of caution. You don't need to be a hero and try and prove anything to anyone. Just look after yourself and those around you in case your bees do get a bit grumpy. Okay, next I'm going to take some flow frames out, and I'll go over a bit of a trick of how to do that. So to lift a flow frame out, there's 3 lift points. One's under there, one's under there, one's under there. Now these have only just started, so all I'll probably need to do is put the J end here, give it a lift like that, and up we come. And I've pulled out a middle one because that's where they're most likely to have started. So I'm seeing almost nothing up the top here, but down lower I'm seeing a little bit of activity where they're starting to build their wax bridges there. So they have made a start, which is good. But to get some burr comb, we're going to need to go into the bottom box and find some wax. So what I'll do is I'll take this box right off, I'll put it up on its end. I'm just going to put this aside. The queen shouldn't be up here because of the excluder, so I can just rest that down on the side here. And it's a case of just getting this box and turning it up on its end. It's still nice and light because there's no honey in it. Then we've got the excluder here, which is the grid that stops the queen from getting up into your honey box. So I'm just lifting that off. And on the underside of this, the queen could be, so have a quick look, see if you can spot the queen. I can't see her there, and I'll rest her up against the the entrance here so that if I did happen to miss her, she could walk back in. Now what I'm seeing here is a colony that's probably not quite ready. If you remember back to when we put the super on, I was saying, well, they're not quite ready, but we'll put it on anyway because we're in a warm climate. And the reason why I can tell that is they haven't started building any burr brace comb up here much at all. There's just one little bit there. So we don't have much to work with to show you this, how this works. But while we're in here, let's just pop a brood frame or two and just have a look and see how this hive is going. So go sideways first and then gently up. And good, we're seeing exactly what we should see. A lot of brood here in the center frame. Look at that, nice brood pattern here. Lots of bees ready to emerge into the hive as young, fluffy baby bees ready to start their chores. And you've got a little bit of pollen up here, but not much in the way of honey stores. So what we're seeing in the windows of the hive is mirroring what we're seeing down here. Normally you've got honey stores around the edges of your brood frame at the top here, but we're not seeing it at all, showing that this hive is a bit hungry. So while you could feed them, generally around here we do get enough to keep them going. So, but if you saw that they didn't have any honey stores at all in the brood box either, then feeding them some sugar syrup would help them along. Beautiful yellow wax, look at that. Sometimes the virgin wax that they make is very white, and other times it's a bit yellow. And in this case we've got this bright yellow wax. You can see the drone brood here sticking out like little bullet shapes. That's normal, they're the boy bees. There's usually about 600 or so in a hive this size, depending on the time of year. And all the rest are worker bees, except for one queen. Here's one just emerging. So I'm tipping this over, and I feel okay about that, even though it's a naturally drawn comb, because it's already connected to the edges. So where was that bee just coming out? We're going to have to brush some bees away. See its head coming out there? It's beautiful. If you've got questions, put them in the comments. Flow hives, beekeeping, and we'll get to answering those. But there it is, almost coming out. But not quite, needs to chew away a little bit more. The other bees wandering by don't seem to really be paying much attention to the fact that a bee's just about to emerge into the hive for the first time. They're just wandering right over its head. And that's how a bee starts its life. Okay, so I'm happy that what I'm seeing in the brood box. They don't have enough nectar coming in to do any stores in the flow frames for quite some time, because they'll actually store around the top of the brood and on the edges first. Let's just pop an edge frame as well and have a look at what's going on there to see if there's any honey stores there. So it just so happens that the late summer in our area is a time where we don't get much flowers. We get flowers coming again towards the winter, and we get quite a good honey flow in the winter time here. So these bees will have to be patient and wait for that. So again, we've got no honey stores anywhere around these edges. So patience is what we'll need to exercise with this hive to get them to store honey in the flow frames. Look at this waggle. Here's a bee doing a round dance. Oh no, it's a figure of 8 dance. See there with the pollen on its legs? It's nicely highlighted. So if we were clever, we could decode that dance and know how far the bees are flying. Now let's see, how long's its waggle? There we go. Oh, it's gotten distracted now. Bit camera shy. So 1 second of waggle is about 750 meters, or close to a kilometer of distance. And then the axis of the figure of 8 tells the angle to the sun. So bees have their own language in the dark. In amongst 50,000 bees, they can somehow communicate just where to go and exact directions, which is incredible, I think. It's an amazing thing, and we're lucky to be able to look in on this world and keep learning to understand it. There's another waggle dance happening. Lots of communication going on the comb today. Hopefully some of the scout bees come back and tell the hive where the nectar's flowering and where the pollen is, and those bees will get out there and get it and keep this hive going. Okay, so not much to work with here to show you what I'm trying to show you, which is what to do if you want to speed up the bees working on the flow frames. And as said, the best thing is patience, waiting till your bees are built up, till there's a lot of bees inside your honey super and a good nectar flow coming in. Nevertheless, people like to mess around and speed it up if they can. So I'm just going to pull out one frame and I'll shake those bees off here. And just grab this frame from the edge here. Wow, look, there's a few beetles there. Good time to activate the pest management tray in the bottom. But to get those beetles out, you can just shake them on a surface like this. Just be careful you don't shake the whole flow frame apart, and you can squash them if you want to. And if you put some oil in the bottom in your tray, you'll find that you'll get a lot of beetles trapped in that oil, and that'll help your hive. Really only concern I find when your colony is weak. If they're weak for any reason, let's say they're swarmed and they haven't quite built back up again, they've got a lot of area to look after, a lot of honey in the box still, and not enough bees to run around and keep those hive beetles in check. That's when you really want to activate your pest management tray, start catching those beetles. So the next thing we're going to do is just get the bees out of the way of where we're going to be scraping some wax off. So I wish we had a bit more to show you, but that's okay. It's best to just use it from the hive that you're working with. You don't want to scrape wax off another hive, just because if you do have the unfortunate luck of getting AFB or EFB, you don't want to be spreading it from one hive to the other. Okay, so you're just scraping it like that, and now it's a simple case of just mashing it into the flow frame surface. Do it on the window side so you can enjoy watching them recycle wax. Now, people sometimes tell me that bees don't recycle wax, but you can watch it with your very own eyes, and very quickly they'll grab that wax there and distribute it in this area. Now, if we had to put a whole lot more on, and wax is the thing to grab, not honey. Honey doesn't make much difference. You put honey on there, they'll just lick it off really quick and nick off again. Wax, they'll spend the time to start making this their own and covering the flow frame parts in wax and joining all the parts together. So normally you'd put a bit more on if you were trying to speed up the bees. And now what we're going to do is simply put the top box back on with that in the window frame. But before that, are there any questions coming in, Chase?
Yeah, it's so good to have everyone coming back for 2023 and joining us again for Facebook Live, which is fantastic. Naomi's asking, Cedar, just wondering how long has it taken for the bees to make all that comb?
Okay, so all the comb in the bottom box. Now, bees are very good at making wax. They use the carbohydrates from the honey, they convert that into wax, they excrete the wax and use their mandibles to mould it into shape, and somehow they're able to create the amazing hexagon structures. Now, sometimes if you've got a big swarm, and swarms will load up on honey before they go, so they're really ready to make wax because they need to create a comb structure to survive. So that swarm starts with nothing, and I've seen it as quick as 2 days to fill a whole box with comb, every single frame drawn out, and the bees are going to collect more nectar to fill them. The queen's already starting to lay. So that's how quick they can go. Now, if they're going slow, then they might go the whole season without actually having enough resources, and that means nectar to convert into honey and then wax, and also enough bees to shape it into honeycomb. So if you've got a colony that's a bit weak, perhaps the queen's getting elderly, she's not laying enough eggs anymore, and you've got a situation where the colony's just really slowing down in numbers, then they might not fill all the combs at all. So that's kind of your polar opposites, 2 weeks to not even filling all of the frames in a whole season. So it really does depend. Typically you'll be waiting a month or two before they fill all of the frames. That's the short answer.
Thanks, Cedar. Tizza, who's a real regular here on Facebook Live, is just wondering, just has a hive that's a bit slow growing, and just thinking, there's brood but not a lot, just thinking of replacing the queen, but wondering if that would make a difference. Also, could it be that the hive is currently under a tree, and could it be that there's too much shade?
Okay, too much shade will only really give rise to things like chalk brood, where you've got a damp issue. So if you haven't got any issues like that, and you probably see that in your tray, it's little chalky mummies, so the larvae turns into a little chalky lump instead of turning into a bee. So if that's not happening, then it's no problem for the hive to be in the shade. So putting it in the sun probably won't make much difference. As you say, it could be genetic, and what you need is a virile queen that can lay up to a couple of thousand eggs a day, and off they go. The other thing it could be is just not enough resources available locally. There's no nectar and pollen for the bees to go and get to build up their stores. So the queen will actually throttle to what's available. So she'll slow down her egg laying if there's not enough nectar coming in. So if you suspect that, and perhaps ask some other beekeepers in your locale, or if you chime in with whereabouts you are, perhaps some others that are watching today can help you there and help you understand whether there actually is what's called a dearth, where there's no nectar around, a bit like what we have right here. And if that's the case, then you'll just have to be patient, but you could decide to feed them as well. So you could feed them a thin syrup if you're wanting to get some more egg laying activity, so that simulates nectar. You'd be going about a 1-to-1 ratio sugar to water, cooking that up, dissolving it in, letting it cool, and then using any type of feeder that you like, whether it be a jar feeder upside down with holes in the lid and so on, and that could stimulate them to get going. But as you say, if other beehives are doing well in the area and yours isn't, then changing the queen is a great idea.
Great. Cedar, Adrian's asking, has comb and honey being built between the frames? So it sounds like there's a bit of cross comb going on in the brood box. Just makes it a bit difficult to inspect the brood frames. Could they scrape off the excess of honey and put that into the flow frames? And also how to fix that cross comb?
Okay, you can. Now, fixing cross comb, we've done a few videos on. Basically, what you need to do, and it's a little bit genetic too, how much the bees, this hive's very clean, there's not much going on between the frames at all. If you wanted to have it like a textbook perfect hive, you'd say this is it here. Look at that they haven't built up any comb between the frames at all. And this is a swarm dumped into an empty box with no wax in it at all and no foundation whatsoever. So genetics does play a role with how tidy they are and whether they like going crossways as well. But I would bet that if there was a lot of nectar stores and we didn't have the top box on, then they would start building comb along the top here, and perhaps between the frames, and even between the end bars here, wherever they could find some space to do some stores. So there's two parts to your question. One is the cross comb. So if you've got comb going crossways, you do need to fix that up to make the hive serviceable. You want to be able to lift up those frames without the comb sticking one frame to the next. You want to be able to get a clean lift like that. Now, so first of all, what you'd do is you'd focus on a frame that was had less cross comb. So look along from the top and perhaps use your smoker to get a better look and go, well, that one doesn't look very cross comb, it's quite free, and we'll lift that one first. So you lift up that frame, and forgive me if you're past this level of advice, but I'll keep talking anyway about the basics of it. So once you've got one out, you can then go sideways, which makes it a lot easier, and you'll basically be teasing the frames apart and seeing which ones have cross comb adjoining them and not. And depending on how badly crossed it is will depend on your strategy. If they're just a little bit across, you can just use your hive tool, use your smoker to clear the bees away, get your hive tool and separate them. The bees will fix up the mess quite quickly, and you're just trying to break the bridges that are joining the combs together. If you've got comb that's going along one frame and then crossways onto the next frame, then you've got a bigger problem. And what you might need to do is do your best to separate them, but if big pieces of honeycomb fall out, then you can use a couple of rubber bands to hold that back in place. So you basically cut the comb out and leave some nice straight sections and use rubber bands to hold them in. Now if it's just honey, you can just take it away and enjoy that and let them have another go at building straight. But if you've got brood in there, then rubber band those pieces back in so that brood can finish its gestation and emerge. So you've got sort of levels of cross comb there. I'm not sure how badly cross combed your hive is. You can get the odd hive, and I've never seen it, where the bees go completely sideways, and in that case you will have to chop that comb out and rubber band it back in straight. Once you get a few straight combs, the bees get the idea and they follow suit. So that's the thing with naturally drawn comb. When you've got bees will be bees, and sometimes they'll go wonky. But I enjoy fixing it up rather than sitting in the shed at night waxing and wiring frames like I used to.
Sue's asking, how do you know when your hive is getting ready, getting near to capacity and ready to swarm and in need of a split?
Okay, good question. So if you look in the windows of your hive and you can hardly see the comb because there's so many bees, that's a good indication that your hive needs some more room. Now if it's springtime, that is the time when bees typically swarm. That you can get some late swarms, but it's unusual. So if it's springtime and you can hardly see the comb through the window, then get in there, take a hive split before they split themselves, because you can't wait around all day waiting to catch a swarm necessarily, unless your hive is right outside your window and you're working from home. So if you get in there and do your spring management, take your splits, then that's a really good thing to do. And that means you get less bees just making homes in random places as well. So the other indication is you see bees bearding off the landing board. Now that gets a bit confusing because they'll do that when it's hot as well. So hot days, you'll see that there's a big bee beard hanging out enjoying the cool air, and they also look a bit like that when they're swarming. But if you see it hanging down even when it's cooler for a number of days, then they might be gearing up to swarm. And if you see that there's a big bee beard and you open the side window and you can hardly see the comb, that's a good indication that they need more room and they'll be gearing up to swarm. But if it's just hot and the bees are all outside, you'll open the side window and there won't be many bees on the comb. So a couple of little useful hints there, and the flow hive has the windows on the side and the back to help you gauge that.
So the Dean's asking, how long do they wait until they put the super on their hive?
So we went a bit early with this one. Normally you'd wait for them to build up a little bit more than we did. However, we're in a warm climate, so we put it on anyway, knowing that we might not get much action for a while. Generally, the rule of thumb is wait till all of the frames are drawn out, which in this hive they really are now. and there's a lot of bees when you open the box. So you want to see a carpet of bees across here and all of the frames drawn out, and that's a good indication that the hive is ready for the super. Now, if it was just coming into winter, say, you might not put that on. So it really depends what's ahead as well. But if the frames are all drawn out, lots of bees, and ahead of you in the season is likely to be flowers, then put your super on and get the bees started on it.
Fantastic. Cedar, Scott's asking, he's tuned in from Brisbane, did an inspection yesterday and found eggs in about 5 queen cups, which he then destroyed. The hive's really strong with a brood box and a flow super. His question is it too late to add another brood box now and therefore need to do an artificial swarm split?
No, it's not too late in Brisbane, because you hardly get a winter at all in this area, and even more so in Brisbane. So you could take splits almost any time of year, depending on what's flowering. So here we do get flowers in the winter. We can take splits almost any time of year, but we generally take them in spring to do our spring management and limit the swarming. But you can, when you're in a subtropical region, take splits just about any time, especially if there's winter flowers.
Fantastic. Cedar, you just mentioned there that you perhaps added that super a bit early. Will it affect the hive now, or would you take it off?
Because we're in a nice warm climate, then I can just leave it on, and when the bees build up, which they are doing, except they've run out of nectar and honey at the moment, they'll, as soon as the flowers start to produce nectar, then they'll really start to store on there. So there's no harm on putting it on too early, apart from the fact that you might get a bit impatient when you look in the windows. However, if you've got a cold time ahead, then I wouldn't put it on, because you are creating more space for the bees to keep warm. So if it's coming into your winter, then I wouldn't add extra empty boxes on your hive.
Oh, great. Look, and following up from that, Brandon's asking, then do you not have to have pests to worry about with more empty space? Is there more to guard for the bees? And so things like hive beetles, mites, do you have to worry about that wax moss because you've got too much space?
So if you're putting the super on for the first time, no, there's nothing there for pests to sink their teeth into. It's just empty space. So it's only once you've got it all coated in wax and there's all honey stores in there that the hive beetles would be interested in laying eggs in those honey stores. So there's no harm there if you're putting it on for the first time. If you're getting it out of storage, and let's say you kept it in a freezer and it's full of honey, then yes, don't put it on till you've got a lot of bees in your box, because, as you say, the hive beetles might take advantage of that space without the bees keeping them in check if there's not enough bees to do so. And as far as mites go, if anyone's got experience with adding extra supers and whether that has any implications of that, please chime in on the thread. We're lucky to have not, it is a loaded question, a loaded answer here. We're lucky to not have to deal with mites yet. We do have a mite control program in New South Wales here where varroa mites are hopefully being kept under control and hopefully eradicated. But we're all still fingers crossed on that one. So if you've got some good information on mites and whether adding extra space affects that, I think not if it's a brand new super on top, but it could have implications there.
Great, and I probably didn't mention, Cedar, that Brandon was actually tuning in from the USA as well, which is part of that question.
Great, there'll be lots of experts on how to deal with mites over there.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Georgine is asking, do you need to wax coat the super frames before putting on the super?
No, I never do that, and we get a lot of great honey off our flow frames, and the bees take to them quite nicely. If you do want to put wax on, then I would recommend just scraping some off the same hive, like off the top of the frames. If they are indeed ready for a super, then you should be getting some wax build up on top of the frames. Do what we showed you earlier, scrape some wax off and just press it into the face, and the bees will go, that's really out of place, and they'll start rearranging that quite quickly. However, some people do like to heat up wax and paint it on, a bit tedious, but that could do the same job as well if you are getting impatient and wanting some more action for the bees. There is a local beekeeper, Daryl here, who has a trick, and he says he puts the super underneath first, so it gets a lot of traffic over it really quickly, and then it's naturalised and you put it on top and they're quicker. If you want to try that, let us know how that goes as well.
Oh, I've never heard that one. That's a good tip, Cedar.
Good tip there from Daryl.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. Hey, Jackie's asking, new beginner beekeeper, so I'm not sure what hive she has, but having problems with ants and has been sprinkling cinnamon around. Is wondering if there's anything else I can do. So I'm thinking maybe they don't have the Flow Hive 2 or the Plus with the ant caps.
So his cinnamon can help. Ants are a bit of annoying. They're only a cosmetic issue because the bees actually keep them out of inside the hive. So they won't bother the bees, won't bother your honey production. They'll just take advantage of some spaces, especially when it gets a bit wet. They often come up out of the ground searching for drier homes. And once you put a bit of effort into getting rid of them, they generally don't come back for a little while. So these ant guards are made to assist you with that, and I'll show you how they work. The ant guard here screws onto the leg bolt of the Flow Hive 2 or 2 Plus, and you lift up the lid like that, and you can put a bit of oil in there, or you might decide to use a Vaseline, which is a white grease. And you can also put some underneath here. And that just provides a barrier that the ants can't actually climb over. Now, after it rains for a while, that oil usually gets washed out of there, and you'll have to do it again. But generally, your ant problem's gone away, and you can wait till next time you have some ant issues and reactivate your ant guards. Cinnamon, as you said, can help. So let's say you've got a classic and you don't have these legs, then a bit of cinnamon dusted behind the covers where the ants are bothering you will, it doesn't necessarily get rid of them, but you'll still need to brush them away a couple of times so it'll stop them coming back again. So often you'll be trying to get rid of them from behind the cover, only to realise right under the roof here is where there's a big ant nest. So check under the gabled roof as well. You might find you need to sweep the ants away from there, and that'll help. And as said, a little bit of effort and they usually don't bother you again for a while.
Yeah, great, and they do have a Flow Hive too, so they've got the ant guard, so that's great. And then there's a few people tuning in with some great ideas as well, so that's always fantastic.
Excellent. If you've got answers to people's questions, chiming in is fantastic. It's great how everyone helps each other.
You'll be out
and it's amazing to have a global community. That's right. That's right. I won't need to answer questions anymore soon.
Hey, Adrian's asking, wondering if you know anything about peppermint lollies used for small hive beetle deterrent.
Oh, no, I haven't heard of that one. If you've got experience with peppermint lollies, and I mean in our beehive, then chime in below. I'd be really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, I like eating them, but fantastic. Now, here's a bit of a long one from Kathleen in, where are they? In California, in the US. Oh, crikey, hold on. There we go. In winter here, and it's been unusually rainy. Could see a patch of capped honey that I've been keeping an eye on in the super window, and it looks like they may be hitting it now. How would I return a small jar of their honey that I saved that dripped into the tree? I guess what she's saying is, how do I feed back some honey back into the bees?
Okay, it's fine to feed honey from the same hive back to itself. Now, the way you could do that is just put them in a jar, put the honey in a jar, get a nail and just punch some little holes in the lid in an area about the size of the inner cover here. And what you'll be doing is on top of that inner cover, this one seems to have decided to stay in that lid. top of that inner cover you've got a plug. So you'll be putting your jar upside down so that what happens is an airlock forms and the honey doesn't just rush out like a shower into your hive. It actually just airlocks and stays there dribbling a little bit, and the bees will suck on those nail holes you make. And that will work quite nicely to feed that honey back.
Nice.
If it's a big jar you're using, then you can put a spare brood box over the top to keep the light off the jar and the lid on top of that. If it's a little one, it'll fit under the gabled roof.
And so do you need to water that down or just?
Not at all. Don't water it down. That will cause fermentation to occur. So you just want to leave it as it is, and the bees will repurpose that honey. And it's a bit surprising actually. They mainly party with it, but they'll put a little bit back into the cells. That's what I've found. But nevertheless, it'll give them a little boost.
Nice. Ellie's asking in Canberra and started with a 5-frame nuke box in early December. They're filling out, she's got a 10-frame box, and the last 2 outer frames are finally starting to be full. Just wondering, as it gets quite cold in Canberra in April, is it too late to add a second brood box so that they can store more honey for the long winter?
Okay, that'd be a good question for locals there around timing of whether it's too late or not. I would say it's not too late, but generally, if you start adding other boxes before the flow frames are full, that'll really slow down that process of filling the flow frames. So you'll be weighing that up. Perhaps you don't mind about that and you just want another box full of comb for them to survive their winter, then that could be a good idea. You'll probably get some good honey coming in. We're still in the summer here, and then you might even get an autumn flow. But local knowledge is always best from the local beekeepers. They've been around the block for a number of seasons and they'll know what's ahead for you.
Great. Thomas is saying honey appearing and then disappearing each day through the windows. Hasn't actually done a harvest yet. Just wondering, should they be worried, or is this normal bees just moving honey around in the frames?
Great observation. The bees will really move honey about, and in fact, if you have a nectar flow on, you'll probably smell it in your apiary where there's this beautiful scent of honey drifting. And when that's happening, go and look in the rear windows of your hives and you'll actually see them splashing around nectar in any empty cells in that rear window view in the afternoons. And what they're doing is just spreading it out to help dehydrate it. And then they'll take that away again and add it to a cell that needs a top up. So they'll continually be moving honey around the hive. It's part of how they dewater it. And also they will uncap honey and eat some if they need to. And they'll be doing that because the nectar flow is turned off and they'll be retracting the honey. So perfectly normal, great observation. And that's how you can actually tell when it's ready to harvest, because you can be watching that pattern. If it's all decreasing pattern, then perhaps don't take much honey away because they might be running out. If you a filling pattern, you see some of the frames are full and others are still filling, then a great time to harvest. Make some space for the bees to store some more. And lucky for us, they store more than they need and we can share some too.
Nice. Vanessa's asking, Cedar, do you know about a Ross round frame? I don't know if it's a feeding thing, because the question is it best to put it on top of the brood box or the super?
Okay, so that's a honeycomb collecting device, and instead of in frames like this, you've got rounds that you might like to put in packages for sale.
Oh, nice.
Now, you could go either, actually. It's up to you on that one, above or below. Now, beekeepers generally under super, so they'll put it between. The reason why that is bees like to often store their honey further away from the entrance, and well, that's the theory anyway. And so if you put a super straight on top, then there might be a bit of effort involved in moving honey from the bottom one to the top. Having said that, I would probably just put it on top because it's a bit easier.
Nice. Joe from Grafton's tuning in. They put on a super about 5 weeks ago, but unfortunately the bees weren't that interested, and now the bees have swarmed. They're just wondering is there anything else we can do. They've just added another queen, and so now is it just the waiting game?
Okay, so you got your hive together. The bees swarmed before they filled the honey super. That's a bit of bad luck. They don't normally do that. So better luck next time. I think you've done the right thing by introducing some known genetics, and as you said, a bit of a waiting game, a bit of patience, and hopefully they'll get onto a good flow and build up and be away again.
Fantastic. Now, Williams started a hive with a fairly well-established 10-frame colony. 2 weeks later, they swarmed, caught them in a box, and then they all returned back to the flow hive. This morning, they've swarmed again. I'm not sure where William is calling in from. It looks like there's no swarm cells in the brood box. Any suggestions on why they keep swarming?
Okay, so it's genetics. We had swarmy genetics in our apiary for a while, and it was mayhem. We had just swarms taking off everywhere in the springtime, and multiple swarms from one hive, more than one in a day sometimes. The thing to do if you've got genetics like that is to go through and replace the queens. Now, beekeepers breed for less swarmy tendencies. It's just a bit easier to manage. So that will sort out your problems if you've got extra swarmy bees, is by purchasing some queens off a queen breeder and swapping them out, so you've got known genetics, and you'll find that problem will go away.
It's funny actually, Seed Pete was here the other day, and he also said that he's had bees where he's put them into a box and they'll swarm, and then he'll change the colour of the box and then they don't swarm, so he thinks they can be a bit fussy on the colour of their brood box.
There you go. So there's always more to the story with bees, and one person's experience isn't wrong, and it's not necessarily right either. It's just right for that beekeeper at that time. So my understanding is it doesn't really matter what colour the box is.
We have to speak to Pete about that. So a couple of people just asking, can you use these hives with native bees?
No, unless you live in Europe, in which case this is the European honeybee, so then it will be native to your area. Or Ireland, you've got the black bees, which are also Apis mellifera, and they'll use these frames. In South Africa, you've got the Cape honeybee, which is another variant again, which has proven to work with the flow frames, but basically you do need the European honeybee, which looks like this, Apis mellifera. In Japan, they got Apis japonica, which is actually different, and they are a smaller, more stripy bee that makes a small amount of honey. With some modifications of size, they were able to get the flow frames working in Japan as well. But you're probably referring to the Australian native stingless bee or sugar bag bee. And they look like tiny little black flies, and they have a completely different comb structure. And they only make, say, you could probably only harvest half a kilo of honey per year from their hive without risking their colony. So you wouldn't go to making an invention such as the flow frames to harvest honey from them. It's just such a small amount of honey. And their comb structure is a spiral grape-like structure. So really different as well.
Fantastic. Sita, just on the hive that you're working on now, how long are you able to just leave your hive open for while you're doing inspections?
If it's a nice warm day, you could leave it open for a long time, hours and hours, and it doesn't really hassle the bees. Sometimes they get a bit annoyed and they get a bit grumpy about that. But this hive's nice and calm. However, if it was a cold winter day, temperatures were low, then you have to be careful about leaving uncapped brood out. capped brood, if you've got that just sitting out of the hive, will be fine. But it's when you've got the open brood, you've got the larvae down the cells, they can get cold shock, so be careful of that. But generally, you're doing beekeeping on a nice sunny warm day, and it's fine to leave the hive open and frames out for hours and hours.
And same on that question, Cedar, do you ever paint or wax coat the inside of your hives?
I don't. I just leave it perfectly natural for the bees. But having said that, there's a long tradition in commercial beekeeping of dipping the boxes in very strong wood preservatives and then painting it inside and out. So you can do that if you want to. Once the bees are established, they won't leave, even if it does smell like paint. But I just prefer to keep it wood. You can also wax coat, but I don't bother with that either.
So to the queen excluder that we use, do you prefer the plastic over the metal, and if so, why is that?
Okay, so there's pros and cons basically. Some people like metal, some people like the plastic. The metal ones do have a bit of an ant home in the rim around the edge, which I used to find annoying. One of the reasons I wasn't that keen on them. But having said that, they are generally probably more preferred. So if you want to swap it out for a metal one, then go for it. The way you get it off is a bit different. It has to come off all in one go. So there's a little bit of a pop, whereas the plastic ones you can just peel off gently and slowly. So there's a few differences there, but they both do the same job. I just pulled out another frame just because we're here, and look at this, so much brood. So this hive is going to boom in bee numbers soon. So it is a good time to have the super on. All they're lacking is a good nectar flow. So we've got amazing brood across here. Look at that. It's like clockwork. That's what you want to see. When you've got a pumping hive, it looks like that. Now, up here, again, no honey. So that's just something to note. They are hungry. While I could feed them, I think I'll bank on something starting to flower, because we get dribs and drabs all season. I'm seeing one little cell of nectar there, so, oh, that bee's just drinking it up. So it's gone already. So yes, they are a little bit hungry, but I am seeing a bit of nectar coming into some of the rear windows of some of the hives, so I know it is around. Here we've got some honey stores remaining just in this top corner, and notice bees are drinking it up. So they're using those honey stores now, and you can see little piercings in the cappings there. I'm not sure if you can see that, just in front of my finger, little piercings. That's them making a little hole, starting to drink up the nectar. As it goes down, they'll make the hole bigger, like here, and keep licking up that honey, because that is their energy, that is their carbohydrate. While bee bread is their protein, honey is their carbohydrate. Okay. Good to see at least a tiny bit of honey. More in this little corner there. And on the other side we've got a little bit more. So they're not completely out, but they're close. See more honey under my finger there. Beautiful.
Cedar, do you ever have to feed the bees here, or have you?
The only reason I've done bee feeding in this area is, one, to experiment, but two, to speed up the feedback loop when we're inventing the flow hive. So we needed to know whether our designs were working. So we did a lot of feeding honey back to bees. So we'd harvest all the honey and feed it back to them. And harvest the honey and feed it back to them. Harvest the honey and feed it back, just to get as many loops as we could to know that the design my father and I were working on was steering us in the right direction or not. And we did that for a decade. So a lot of feeding there, but that was for quite a different reason. We actually don't need to feed in this area at all, because even now, even though it's a bit of a hungry time, you've still got flowers like this here, which you will see the bees foraging on. So there's always something for them. It's generally areas that have a long cold winter that actually get a big break from any flowers, and it's in those places which beekeepers will often choose to feed to boost a colony. The other reason people might feed is if they want to really get a jump on the season. Let's say you're a commercial operator, you knew there was going to be a big flowering of the ironbark, so you might put on a thin syrup in the early spring, even before it flowers, to get the bees building up, so that stimulates the queen to lay. You've got twice as many bees as soon as those buds pop and start to produce nectar. The bees are on them, so that can increase honey production like that, which is a common reason for feeding too.
Hey Seeds, just before you pop that frame back in, Georgina's got a question, and Callum, our awesome camera operator, might be able to zero in. Her question is, how can you tell the difference between capped brood and capped honey?
Okay, great question. Let's have a look at that. So, it's how transparent the capping is. If you have a look under my finger here, you've got the wax capping over the top, but there's a transparency to it. You can see through it in parts. Now, while that might be darker on old combs, it still has a similar kind of appearance. Whereas you look at the capping on the brood and it's more opaque, so it's got quite a different look to it. So pretty quickly you can get your eye in and tell the difference between honey here, capped honey, and capped brood over here.
That's a great frame because they're right next to each other and it looks fantastic. You can really see the difference. It's great. Seed, what about, so that's capped brood. How do you know if you've got too much, can you have too much rather, worker brood? Drone brood, sorry.
Okay, drone brood. So we had a frame with drones on it earlier. Let's see if I can find that for you again. So drone brood sticks out a little bit bullet shaped sticking out from the cells. So I'll just show you what that looks like while we're talking about it. I was just focusing there, gently putting that frame back in, but I might just add a bit of smoke. There's a lot of bees down between the frames and they're being very patient with me, which is nice of them. And look at that, a little bit of smoke, and that cleared the decks. So although they probably don't like smoke in their face, it's very handy. You'll squash less bees by using it in that way. So I'm pulling out this frame now to see if this is the one I saw the drone brood on earlier. Now, let's have a look. Not seeing it there. Oh, this is the one that's got the comb guide that fell out through the middle. Look at that. It just fell right out, but it didn't really matter. We've got a queen cup there. So that's what a queen cup looks like. And I'm not seeing the drone. Must be next frame over. Put that one back. Get out the next frame. But in my mind, you can get into an issue where your hive is mainly drones, and it's usually from another problem, which is your queens stop laying and the workers are laying. Now the workers can't lay fertilised eggs generally, and what happens is you get lots and lots of drones instead of workers, so that's them there. So if you're looking in your hive and that's all you're seeing, and hardly any worker brood or none at all, then you've probably got laying workers that are laying all through the hive, and you'll get the male bees, the drones, out of that. So you'll need to queen right your hive, it gets called, where you buy in another queen, or you give the bees the resources to make one of their own by swapping a frame with eggs on it that they can build a queen from. Now I'm just supporting this comb here because I've got it leaned over for the camera, but it is wobbling a bit. It's nice and heavy. So some people do actually wipe out the drone cells in a hive, and for me that's meddling a little bit too much with what the bees are trying to do. But the theory there is they'll eat less honey and you'll get more honey production. So some beekeepers might get in there and decide that they want to interfere to that level, and they'll start smashing off all the drones in a hive. But I tend to just let the bees do that if they want to. So a hive in a time when there's a dearth or not much nectar flow, what they will actually do is they'll kick the drones out, and they'll try and rip their wings off and kick them out so that there's no more mouths to feed unnecessarily, because the drones don't do much around the hive. So they may as well get out, and that will help the colony survive. But yes, you can get into the situation where also you've got a queen that's towards the end of her life and she's running out of sperm. She won't mate again, and if you've got half drone brood and half worker brood, then replace your queen, because that could be the issue there. Time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, seeds. Okay. Kate's asking, got a friend who's had a flow hive for years and hasn't really had much honey. Do you think her brood might be full of drones and the queen is insufficient?
Have a look.
Tricky one, yeah.
Have a look, not sure. It could be the season, so compare to other people in your area whether they're getting any honey or not. That'd be the first thing to do. And if not, then replacing the queen would be the way to... Sorry, if other people are getting lots of honey and you're not, because your hive's just a bit slow off the mark, it's not really getting enough bee numbers and not really producing honey stores, then you'll need to get in there, find a queen, take her away and replace it. Ideally with a queen from a queen breeder with good productive genetics. Nice calm genetics also would be ideal, and that should get your hive back on track.
Right, so get in and have a little look-see, see what's going on. So do you always use a smoker when you do brood inspections?
Not always, but mostly. As you've seen, I use them for clearing bees out of the way. But if you had a hive that really didn't have many bees in it and you knew they were quite gentle, you might decide not to use the smoker. But beginning in beekeeping, always get in your bee suit, use your smoker, wear your gloves until you're really comfortable in making those decisions.
Oh, so it's interesting on that last one, Kate, whose friends were having problems with honey, they were also in Victoria and they were surrounded by floods as well. So what's going on there?
Yeah, weather can really affect honey production. We've had fires here, and that had a hangover effect for quite a while because a lot of the forage that they used to forage on actually got burnt and so on, and a lot of trees just sometimes they're sort of dialing themselves up a year and a half ahead, so you might actually get from a weather event that a year or two down the track you'll get flowers that might not flower when they used to as well. So the weather can really upset the apple cart when it comes to getting a good honey production, just like anything in farming. Okay, we're going to close this hive back up now. We're going to take the opportunity, while there's not many bees just around the rim here, I'll put the last ones back in like this and put that excluder back on. Oh look, some bees weren't so fortunate at an inspection recently. And now the hive can go back on. So the flow super will go back on top. Now I've got a few frames out because we were doing a bit of a show and tell with them earlier. So I'll just put that right on top. Now this hive, although we saw a lot of bees starting to get action in here, you can see there's not really enough numbers to really get a good honey storage yet. Normally it's kind of hard to put your super on when there's a lot of bees in a box and they're ready to really store a lot of honey. So that's another sign that this super was put on a little bit early. Now we're going to put this one with the little bit of wax we put in there. That's a small example of what you can do if you want to speed up the bees working on the flow frames. Do it in the window side so you can enjoy watching them recycle that wax. Scrape off some burr comb like that and mash it in. You want wax, not honey. It doesn't matter if it does have honey, but honey itself won't do much good. And that way the bees will come up there and recycle it, and it'll speed them up just slightly, but again, they won't actually store any honey until there is an abundance of nectar and the colony's nice and strong and can go and get it. So putting this last frame in can be a bit tricky, so let me just show you a bit of a trick with that. First of all, you want all your frames forward, so they're all nice and in line. These screws haven't been adjusted out, so I'm just manually pulling them forward. Then I find you put the face in first and you roll it around into place like that. And that way it keeps everything nice and in line and it slots down nicely. And you get a good window across here. Next, on goes the inner cover like that. And the gabled roof on top. And also, don't forget to put your windows on. You don't want to leave a lot of sunshine coming in the windows of your hive, because that'll work like a solar cooker and heat up the hive a lot. So you want to make sure you're putting the window covers back on. Not a lot of bee action yet. Aha. Another tip, put the handle out and then the window will fit. Okay, good. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you want a head start, if you're a new beekeeper, there's rave reviews about the beekeeper.org. It's a program we started where it takes you from square one right through to a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. It's a great online learning course, also a fundraiser. We've planted over 1 million trees now, which we're pretty excited about, from funds from that course. Experts from all over the world have contributed to that, and it's great no matter where you are in the world, because there's experts in cold climates, experts in varroa mites, experts in everything contributing to that course. So while we're here in the subtropics, if you want some deeper learning about other parts of the world, that's a good spot to look. So go and have a look there. We've also got our garden tools, which you might have recently seen pop up on the website. Now they're a really nice solid garden tool, help you out when you're planting in your pollinator garden, so take a look at them. Thank you very much for tuning in, same time next week, and let us know what you'd like us to cover, and hopefully we can get all your questions answered.